The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the red earth. Beyond the circle of light, the vastness of the Australian bush stretched into darkness, a realm where myths and reality intertwine. They call it the Yowie, a creature whispered about in hushed tones, its name evoking both fear and fascination. Described as a towering ape-like being, cloaked in hair and mystery, it is said to roam the remote regions of the continent, eluding the grasp of science and skepticism alike. The origins of the Yowie legend trace back to the oral traditions of Aboriginal Australians. Among the Kuku-Yalanji people of far north Queensland, tales speak of two types of Yowies, one towering up to 10 feet tall, the other smaller, yet equally elusive. These beings were not mere stories but integral parts of the Dreamtime, embodying the spirits of the land and serving as guardians, or warnings, of the natural world. European settlers, upon arriving in Australia, encountered these legends and, over time, added their own accounts. In 1876, the Australian Town and Country Journal published a letter describing a Yahoo devil, a hairy man of the woods, echoing the Aboriginal narratives. Such reports continued into the 20th century, with sightings scattered across the continent, from the dense forests of the east to the rugged terrains of the west. Despite the passage of time, the Yowie remains an enigma. Modern encounters, though sporadic, persist, often accompanied by footprints, strange sounds, or fleeting glimpses. Skeptics attribute these to misidentifications or hoaxes, yet the consistency of descriptions across cultures and eras suggests a deeper mystery. As the fire's glow dances against the encroaching darkness, one can't help but wonder, is the Yowie a relic of ancient lore, a figment of collective imagination, or a hidden inhabitant of the vast Australian wilderness? Long before the sound of tires touched red dirt roads, before fence posts split the land into names and deeds, the Outback spoke in whispers only the old ones could hear. In those ancient murmurs passed from one dusk to another, there was a presence, not always seen, but always felt. A figure not quite man, not quite beast, walking upright through the shadowed gums and bloodwoods. The Yowie, they would later call it. But it had other names before that, older names soaked in the dreaming. Among the Aboriginal peoples, tales of these creatures weren't fringe folklore. They were part of the cosmology, sewn into the fabric of country. In some stories, they were watchers of sacred places, protectors of hidden law. In others, they were warnings, beings of the dark who punished those who strayed too far or forgot to listen. The Kuku-Yalanji of far north Queensland spoke of two kinds, one massive, towering over 10 feet, the other smaller but still fierce, still powerful. Both feared, both respected. When the Europeans came, carrying with them their own ghosts and superstitions, the land offered up its mysteries in glimpses. The settlers had no language for what they saw, just fragments scrawled in journals, published in dusty newspapers that no longer print. In 1871, one such account spoke of a wild man of the woods, sighted near Bateman's Bay, standing near a stream at dusk, motionless, watching. The creature was described as tall as 2 men, its body thick with coarse dark hair. The observer fled, leaving behind only a trembling note in the local press. And yet, the bush gave nothing more. No carcass, no trail, no photograph, just that old silence. But silence is not absence, not here. The Australian wilderness is vast in a way that unsettles the modern mind. It doesn't announce itself. It absorbs. You can walk for days and see nothing but trees and dust, and still be watched. The Outback doesn't forget the stories told on its soil. It keeps them alive in the rustle of spinifex, the distant knock of a branch at midnight, the spaces between stars. There is something in that space that keeps the Yowie alive, not just as a myth, but as a possibility, a whispered maybe, a haunting unfinished sentence in the lexicon of this land. There's a weight to the stories that come out of the bush, not just because of what they claim, but how they're told. Low, deliberate, often reluctantly, like someone passing a burden. The truth, if there is any, always arrives incomplete. A sound, a shape, a smell that doesn't belong. The Yowie isn't described in tales that begin with certainty. It arrives in fragments, disjointed moments stitched together by breathless voices and the certainty that something happened, even if no one believes it. It's in this realm, between what's seen and what's feared, that the Yowie lingers. Take, for instance, the case of the surveyor from 1912. Working in the forests near Bateman's Bay, New South Wales, he was accustomed to the land's silence, to the way the trees swallow sound and light. But on one particular afternoon, that silence twisted. He reported hearing something moving through the underbrush, not the skitter of a wallaby or the bounce of a kangaroo, but something heavy, deliberate. Bipeds sound different in the bush. Our gait betrays us. He didn't see the creature until it stepped into view. 7 feet tall, covered in coarse hair, eyes set deep into a flat face. The surveyor, a rational man by his own account, described the overwhelming stench, musky, foul, like rotting vegetation and sweat, and the way his instincts told him to run before his mind caught up. He fled, abandoning his equipment. Later, he filed a report that ended up buried in a drawer, labeled unexplained, but he never went back. That was the part that stuck. Not what he saw, but what it changed in him. And it wasn't an isolated case. During the 1970s, a rash of sightings exploded across Springbrook, Queensland. Locals reported guttural howls echoing through the forest at night, sounds too deep for a dog, too primal for a man. Bushwalkers found enormous footprints in the mud after rains, some over 40 centimeters long. One park ranger, anonymous in all reports, claimed to have found trees twisted and splintered high above what any human could reach, as though something immense had wrenched them apart in a fit of rage or warning. A recording surfaced in 1977, grainy, crackling, the kind of tape that sounds haunted even without the content. A man's voice, trembling, says, "It came out of the trees, tall, covered in hair, red eyes, and that smell. God, that smell." Then the tape cuts out. Some dismissed it immediately. Audio tricks, a hoax. But those who've walked the forest after dark, they listen differently. And then there are the footprints. Always the footprints. Big, wide, oddly proportioned, often with an exaggerated arch or a divergent big toe. Amateur cryptozoologists pour plaster into the impressions, photograph them, measure the stride, often over 2 meters between steps. Some show claw marks. Others resemble oversized human feet. Few experts have examined the casts and declared them hoaxes or misinterpretations, but others quietly admit confusion. The Australian bush is a place where strange prints don't last. The ground is dry, then wet, then dry again. Wind erases, time obscures, but the stories persist. In recent years, hair samples have been found near alleged sighting sites. Lab analysis often yields familiar results: wallaby, possum, feral dog. One sample, collected in the Blue Mountains in 2015, came back inconclusive. The DNA matched no known native species, nor any introduced one. The lab dismissed it as contamination. The field researcher who submitted it wasn't so sure. That's the tension. Every shred of potential evidence comes wrapped in doubt. A footprint could be faked. A hair sample could be contaminated. An eyewitness could be lying, mistaken, or simply overwhelmed by fear and isolation. The mind does strange things in the bush, especially when it wants to make sense of something senseless. Skeptics are quick to point out the impossibility of a large primate living undetected on this continent. Australia, they argue, broke off from the rest of the world long before the evolution of great apes. There's no fossil record, no evolutionary pathway. Every mammal here is a marsupial, or descended from ones. And yet, the forest doesn't care about our logic. It hides what it wants to hide. It's easy to forget, in our world of GPS and Google Earth, that there are still places where you can walk for days and see no one. Still pockets of dense, unforgiving land that don't bend to our maps. The bush isn't just landscape, it's memory. And it doesn't forget the footprints left in its silence. Perhaps that's what keeps the Yowie alive. Not the creature itself, but the shadow it casts across generations of watchers, wanderers, and the few who return from the dark with their hands shaking. In the quiet spaces between science and superstition, culture weaves its own truths. And nowhere is that clearer than in the shape the Yowie has taken in the collective imagination of Australia. Once a whisper passed along campfires and carved into the dreaming of this ancient continent, the creature now walks in two worlds, the sacred and the sensational. It is both a spirit of the land and a figure on a souvenir mug. A mystery diluted perhaps, but not erased. By the late 20th century, the Yowie had become more than an elusive shadow in the forest. It had become a fixture in modern folklore, the kind you don't just hear about, but inherit. Like a story told by your uncle when the fires burned low and the dogs have gone quiet. That mix of thrill and dread, of hoping it's true just enough to make you shiver, but not enough to follow you back to the tent. Popular culture latched onto the legend like a leech in a creek bed. Films, comics, children's books. There was even a line of chocolate figurines, Yowie-shaped, filled with toys, which turned the cryptid into something you could unwrap and eat. And for many growing up in the 90s, that was their first introduction. Not as a creature stalking the forests, but as a cartoon protector of the environment. A far cry from the ancient stories or the trembling voices of bushmen who swear they locked eyes with something that did not belong. Still, even diluted, the myth persists. There's something about the Yowie that resists containment. A part of us knows it doesn't belong in plastic packaging or low-budget horror flicks. It belongs out there, where the black wattle leans over dry creeks and the wind carries secrets no road ever touched. Yet, every retelling changes the story. With each new iteration, the creature morphs, sometimes into a brute, a terror of fang and muscle. Other times into a misunderstood sentinel, hiding not out of malice but instinct. The Yowie becomes what we need it to be, a scapegoat for the unexplained, a metaphor for the wildness we can't quite tame, or a guardian of a world we're losing, the old bush untouched and unknowable. And this malleability is not accidental. The creature sits at a strange crossroads, where indigenous belief systems overlap with colonial fear, and where both are refracted through the lens of commercialization. The Yowie doesn't just inhabit the forest, it inhabits our anxieties, about nature, about the unknown, about the limits of our control. Still, some communities embrace it wholeheartedly. Towns like Kilcoy in Queensland, or Glen Innes in New South Wales, have leaned into their reputations as Yowie country. Local pubs have murals of the beast. Festivals are held. There are walking tours, merchandise, roadside attractions, entire microeconomies shaped around something that might not even exist. And for those towns, the Yowie isn't a joke. It's a source of pride, a symbol that their patch of dirt is special, touched by mystery, but that pride has a shadow too. For every genuine seeker, someone who saw something, felt something, and wants to understand, there are dozens chasing fame, clicks, and spectacle. The rise of internet culture has made the Yowie both easier to access and harder to believe. YouTube is filled with shaky videos, blurry shapes in the dark, breathless commentary. Paranormal podcasts rehash the same few stories, amplifying details, muddying timelines. And in the process, the line between belief and entertainment blurs. That blurring comes at a cost. It dilutes the testimony of those who carry the real weight of the legend. The ones who didn't want to believe, who didn't go looking for anything, but who still came back changed. Their voices get lost in the noise. Or worse, mocked. And the deeper truths, cultural, psychological, ecological, slip further into the background, buried under jump scares and viral thumbnails. Still, the bush remembers. Long after the Wi-Fi signal fades, when the car's engine cuts and all you hear is the wind through the gums and the echo of your own breath, the land doesn't care about clicks. It doesn't care about documentaries or candy wrappers. Out there, in the places where light doesn't quite reach and stories still move through the undergrowth, the Yowie walks. Not for fame, not for fear, just because it always has. The human mind, for all its pride and logic, has always danced with shadows. We are creatures shaped not just by what we know, but by what we fear we might not. And in the vast expanse of the Australian Outback, where silence can scream and distance becomes a kind of pressure on the soul, that fear finds fertile ground. It plants itself deep, blooms in isolation, and takes the shape of whatever our ancestors told us might be watching. Perhaps that's why the Yowie persists. Not because it's real in the scientific sense, though some would swear by that, but because it's real where it matters most, in the parts of us that don't trust the stillness, that flinch at a sound with no clear source. Out there, surrounded by trees older than memory and a sky so vast it could swallow time, the rational mind has limits. Psychologists might point to pareidolia, the way we see meaning in randomness, faces in clouds, movement in the brush. Or apophenia, the tendency to connect unrelated things, to find patterns in the noise. And they're right. We are built to seek meaning, built to survive. In the days when we huddled around fires for warmth and safety, assuming that noise in the dark was something dangerous kept us alive more often than it didn't. But what happens when that survival instinct outlasts the threat? When our minds keep seeing shapes, keep hearing things, even when logic says there's nothing there? In the bush, where even known creatures move with uncanny silence, and where one wrong turn can mean days without rescue, that old instinct returns. The Yowie in this light isn't a beast. It's a manifestation of fear, of memory, of something older than science. Then there's the weight of suggestion. The Yowie isn't just something you encounter. It's something you inherit. If you've grown up hearing stories, if your grandfather swore he saw something near a creek bed in '54, or your mother warned you never to walk the ridge alone, that shapes how you see the world. It primes your senses. It lays down tracks in your brain that say, if you hear a branch snap, maybe don't assume it was just the wind. And once the idea is planted, it doesn't take much. A rustle becomes a warning. A shadow. A presence. Your own breath starts to sound like a stranger's. And even if later in the daylight you tell yourself it was nothing, in the moment, it was everything. This is how the Yowie breathes. Not through lungs or tracks, but through fear and inheritance. Still, the story isn't all dread. In many rural communities, the Yowie serves another role entirely. It's a point of identity, a story that belongs to that place, to those people. Glen Innes, Kilcoy, Woodenbong. Their Yowie isn't just a cryptid, it's kin. It's something they share with pride, something that links them to the land in a way the cities will never understand. He's part of the bush, part of them. And perhaps that's the most telling function of the Yowie, as a cultural mirror. In a country that still wrestles with its past, that lives in the tension between ancient tradition and modern disconnection, the Yowie is a bridge, a creature born of the dream time and carried into Wi-Fi age. A remnant of what we used to believe, and a symbol of what we still want to believe, that the world isn't entirely known. That wonder and wildness still exist, somewhere out there in the dark. Of course, there are those who exploit that wonder. Tourism campaigns, hoaxers, opportunists. They've turned the Yowie into a brand, a commodity. They've wrapped mystery in neon signage and sold it for $20 at the servo. And in doing so, they've obscured the real power of the myth, not as entertainment, but as a question, an open-ended one, the kind that doesn't ask to be answered, only considered. Because in the end, the Yowie isn't a monster or a mascot. It's a space, a silence, a shape in the trees that makes you stop walking and listen harder. And in that pause, that crack between certainty and doubt, is where the Outback whispers back. There comes a point in every mystery where the question stops being about the creature and starts being about us. What we believe, why we believe it. What we're willing to accept when the lights are out and the wind rattles the walls of our certainties. The Yowie, in this respect, is less an animal to be found, and more a mirror we hold up to ourselves, rough-edged, cracked, reflecting something ancient and half-forgotten in the lines of our faces. Because what do we do with the testimonies? People who've seen something, not once, not twice, but across decades, across lifetimes. They don't come back from the bush with souvenirs or stories neatly tied with explanations. They come back changed, quiet, sometimes broken, sometimes angry that no one believes them, sometimes terrified that someone might. One such man, never named in reports, was camping near Pilliga in New South Wales. Middle of winter, fire low, dog asleep at his feet. Around 2 a.m. he hears breathing, heavy, rhythmic, not his own, not the dog's. Something just beyond the ring of firelight, pacing slow. He freezes, doesn't move, just listens. Says it circled his tent 3 times before stopping. Then silence. Then a sound like teeth grinding, deep, wet animal. He never saw anything, packed up before dawn, left the bush, never returned. That's not the story of someone seeking fame. That's the story of someone who heard the bush speak back and didn't like what it said. There's an ache in these accounts, a burden. To see something others say cannot exist is a kind of exile. It places you outside the map of consensus. And in Australia, a country so often obsessed with rationalism, with shrugging off the weird, that kind of belief isolates. The Yowie believer isn't just doubted, they're ridiculed. A punchline, a warning, don't be like him. But some don't care. They walk the trails again and again, scanning the edges, recording sounds, collecting casts. They keep the faith, even when science has nothing for them, even when the headlines stop coming. For them, the Yowie isn't a question anymore. It's a presence, a fact, one not yet admitted by the rest of the world. And what of the skeptics? Their arguments are compelling. The fossil record says nothing like the Yowie ever evolved here. The logic of evolution offers no path for great apes in Australia. No bones, no burrows, no clear ecological niche, just shadows, noise, stories. They point to the likelihood of hoaxes, of people misidentifying known animals, a large kangaroo moving strangely, a feral pig, a human in a suit. They highlight the psychological conditions that prime people to see what they expect, or want to see. And they argue, rightly, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But the bush doesn't work on terms like extraordinary. It works on silence, distance, memory. And in the Outback, where the scrub rolls on for hundreds of kilometers without break, without signal, without rescue, what counts as proof begins to shift. We forget how little of this land we've actually mapped with any depth. We forget how often we've been wrong. The thylacine was declared extinct, and still, sightings persist in Tasmania. Animals thought wiped out have reappeared. A night parrot rediscovered. A wallaby assumed extinct for over a century, captured by camera trap in the Kimberley. Maybe the Yowie is fiction. Or maybe we've just stopped listening in the right places. It's easier, after all, to believe in a world fully mapped. A world explained. It gives us comfort, control. But comfort is a lie out here. The bush has its own rhythms, its own rules. And sometimes when the fire burns low and the stars look too sharp in the cold night sky, you hear something that makes you doubt the neatness of what you thought you knew. That's where the Yowie lives. Not just in the trees, but in the gap between certainty and silence. By now, the pattern is clear. Sightings, denials, shadows, laughter, silence. A cycle that repeats with each generation. But what is perhaps most haunting about the Yowie isn't the creature itself. It's the way we treat those who say they've seen it. The way we exile them into myth along with their stories. Like we're afraid that if we listen too closely, something inside us might shift. Some confessions don't make it into reports. They're whispered at bars on the edge of town, told over a second beer, maybe a third, never the first. Told with eyes that don't quite meet yours, and a voice that checks the door before it speaks. One man, a ranger from the Stirling Ranges, said it only once to a stranger, one night when the wind was too strong to ignore. He was hiking a closed track after a fire, checking regrowth, when he caught movement to his left. Not a wallaby, not a roo, not a person. Tall, hair the color of burnt timber, moving with weight, but no noise. It stopped when he did, matched his pace. When he turned fully, it was gone. Just scrub, just bush. But something had been there. He didn't tell his supervisor, didn't write it down, only shared it years later, and even then, barely. And that's the shape of belief in this country. You don't shout it. You carry it, quietly. Like a scar you got from somewhere no one believes you went. Of course, not all stories are quiet. Some explode. The internet gave the Yowie a second life, a noisier one. Videos, forums, clickbait articles. Amateurs with trail cameras and blurry footage. Audio clips that could be anything, or everything. And with that surge came ridicule. The louder the story, the quicker the dismissal. A cost paid for visibility. There's a term in cryptozoology, high strangeness. It describes events that don't just bend reality but feel wrong on a deeper level. And that's how many Yowie encounters feel to those who experience them. Not just surprising, dislocating. As if they've glimpsed something that doesn't belong, and for a moment neither do they. The rules shift, the land tilts. Some believe the Yowie isn't an animal at all, that it belongs to another category entirely, not biological but spiritual, a dreamtime echo, a guardian, a reminder, a challenge. If it exists, it does so on its own terms, not ours. It appears when it wants to whom it chooses, maybe not even wholly in this world, not flesh but story made visible. That's a notion not easily digested by science, but in the bush, not all truths are made for labs. Then there's the question that haunts all of this. Why? Why would something so large, so potentially powerful, remain hidden? And the answers are simple, if you listen the right way. Because it knows how to be forgotten. Because it doesn't want to be found. Because we only ever look with the kind of eyes that miss the old things. In some ways, it's not that the Yowie hides. It's that we no longer know how to see it. The land has memory. It remembers the dreaming, remembers when we walked barefoot, not through it, but with it. Back then, we knew things without needing to name them. We understood that silence wasn't emptiness, but presence. That shadows didn't just obscure, they protected. That some things weren't to be chased. Maybe the Yowie isn't a secret to uncover. Maybe it's a lesson we've forgotten. And maybe, in its footsteps, it's leaving reminders for those still willing to listen. The land out here has a rhythm that doesn't match the clocks we carry. It speaks in long silences and short, sharp warnings. A crack of branch, a shift in wind, a breath held too long. And somewhere within that rhythm the Yowie moves. Whether it's real in the sense we usually demand, bone, blood, trackable, or real in some older, deeper way, depends on the kind of truth you're willing to accept. Some truths aren't loud. They don't arrive with headlines or camera flashes. They come on the breath of a story told twice, once to a stranger, once to the fire. That's where most Yowie confessions live. Not in evidence bags or field reports, but in the spaces between words. A hesitation, a glance sideways before finishing a sentence. A sentence that ends not in certainty, but with the same word again, spoken softer. Yowie. The one man, a retired police officer from Coffs Harbour, carried his story for 25 years before he told it. Not out of fear of the creature, but fear of what people would say. He'd been driving alone through the Aurora State Forest, late night, no moon. He stopped because something crossed the road. Not fast, not startled, just moving with a confidence that made the hair on his arms stand. Tall, massive shoulders, arms that reached too far. He blinked and it was gone. But the smell lingered. Wet, earthy, like rot under bark. He told no one, until he couldn't hold it anymore. It's always the smell, he said. No one talks about the smell. Smell is memory's strongest tether. The bush is full of it. Eucalyptus, smoke, dust, blood. The tang of rain before it arrives. And yet, again and again, those who claim to have encountered the Yowie return to that strange stench. Something primal, something wrong, like the body knows before the mind can explain. There are places now, if you search online, where believers gather. Share photos, compare casts, swap coordinates. But it's not the data they hold on to. It's the knowing, the sense that what they saw wasn't a mistake or a dream, that for a second, the veil thinned and the world reminded them that not everything fits. And then there are the Aboriginal elders who never stopped believing. Because for them, it was never belief to begin with. It was knowledge. Stories not made to entertain or scare, but to guide, to respect the bush, to understand your place in it. They speak of creatures who guard country, who punish arrogance, who walk at dusk and don't like to be watched. And when asked if the Yowie is real, many won't answer directly. They'll just nod or say, "You'll see if you're meant to." We don't hear those stories often, not the real ones, not the ones shared in quiet ceremony or over fires that burn low and long. Not the ones that echo through country like a breath taken in before lightning strikes. But they exist, and they run parallel to the sightings and the skeptics. Another track, deeper, older. Because belief, true belief, doesn't argue. It doesn't need to, it just keeps walking. Through scrub and rain and centuries, through silence and ridicule, through cameras that never quite focus in time. It leaves behind footprints, real or imagined, and the sense that maybe, just maybe, we're not the only ones who still remember how to walk between worlds. Some things out here are meant to be forgotten. That's what the old men say. Not in bitterness, but in reverence. Because forgetting can be a kind of respect, a way to leave the sacred untouched. But we've never been good at forgetting. We dig, we chase, we label. And somewhere in all that naming, the land grows quiet. The stories dry out. What was once seen in glimpses is now lost in noise. The Yowie, if it ever lived in bone and breath, has done what the land taught it. It withdrew, slipped back behind the gums and granite, back into the space where stories breathe but do not beg to be believed. And yet we still search. There are those who comb the forests with drones, thermal cameras, baited traps. They leave apples, audio recorders, infrared beams. They camp in spots known for sightings, hoping for movement, for a shape in the trees, for that low grunt that doesn't sound quite right. They come back with blurry footage, hair samples, molds of prints too large, too spaced to be human. They say this is evidence, but evidence is a language the bush doesn't speak, not when it comes to things that dwell outside the frame of proof. The Yowie isn't an animal in a zoo, waiting to be catalogued. It's a whisper, a consequence, maybe even a test. One that asks, do you need to see it, or can you simply accept that not all paths have endings? Because for every physical trace, there are 1,000 silences. For every footprint in the mud, 100 footprints washed away before they were found. For every story told, another buried by shame or disbelief. Still, the urge remains. Not just to prove the Yowie, but to reclaim something older, something we lost when we stopped listening, when we stopped walking quietly, when we replaced awe with answers. And maybe that's the heart of it. Maybe the Yowie is not a thing, but a space where mystery still lives, where not everything has been named or conquered or mapped, where the trees lean in a little closer and the night breathes with more intention. The search then becomes more than the hunt for a creature. It becomes a pilgrimage, a way to remember that the land is still wild, and so are we. That there are things we once knew, deep in the marrow, in the dream, that still wait for us under the canopy, in the hush of dusk, when the sky folds purple over red soil, and even the birds fall quiet. It's in those moments that the boundary thins, between the known and the unspeakable, between what is and what might be. And in that breath, just there, the Yowie walks. The fire's nearly gone now, just coals, red like eyes glimpsed too long in the dark. The wood gives its last whispers, collapsing into ash as the night folds around it. And beyond the circle of light, there's only the sound of wind threading its way through black trees, the kind of wind that doesn't just move air, but memory. You've heard the stories. You've traced the footsteps through the dust, held them up against logic, stretched them across time, but still it stands, the silence, unbroken. And maybe that's the point. We came here seeking answers, a name, a photograph, a final word. But the bush doesn't trade in conclusions, only offerings, echoes, the shape of something just past understanding, standing too still in the distance, waiting. Because the Yowie was never meant to be found, it was meant to be felt. In the back of the neck when the forest goes too quiet, in the eyes of someone who's seen too much and now says too little. In the land itself, cracked, vast, old beyond reckoning, where every hollow, every rustle, every breath of dust might be the last sign of something not yet gone, or not yet born. It's easy, under city lights, to laugh, to mock the old stories, to call it myth, misidentification, madness, but that's not what the wind says when it moves through the trees in the small hours. That's not what your body believes when you're alone, far from signal, far from help, and you hear something move in rhythm with your heartbeat. You don't call it madness then. You just listen. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the Yowie wanted all along. Not your belief, not your capture, just your silence, your respect, your fear. Because the bush doesn't forget. It remembers every step, every lie, every question asked too loud, and when it's ready, it speaks back. Not in words, not in answers, but in something older. A crack of a branch where no one walks. A shape at the edge of your vision, taller than thought. A voice in the dirt saying only, "I was here. I am still here. You just stopped looking the right way. And now you've heard the confession, the one that was never meant to reach you. Not from lips, but from land, from something waiting just past the firelight. The bush speaks. Are you still listening?